All right. Perfect. All right. I think we have most of our folks in who need to be in. Thank you guys for joining on the 20th of December. Really appreciate it. I know I like lots of scared faces. Lori, I saw yours. You can't have that many days of school left. Is this the last
This
one?
is it. So it's crazy today.
I'm
Today's our
sure. I'm
day.
sure.
It's like,
Well, I really appreciate it. And it's just, I know we're like getting up to the holiday season, so thank you guys so much for being on. I'm hoping today we won't take the full time. I have faith that we will be able to end early today. But I do think we have some really important discussions to have before we sort of finalize everything, and I can get the draft rule off to you to review before we send that to the Board of Public Ed. So what I think how we're gonna do today, you guys should all have the agenda packet. First, we'll go through the minutes, and then we're gonna jump right into 1063-110, which is that really big section about content standards and developmental domains. I know Colette and Christine have done a ton of work, and I do want to make sure Christine's on, so we may kind of jump back when she gets on, but I know people have to sort of duck in and out today. And so we'll be really respectful of people's time and make sure that everyone can weigh in on some of these sections before we do try to finalize them. So we'll go through that section. We'll take a quick sort of break at noon. I think last time I actually went until 12:30. So noon or 12:30, somewhere around there. We'll try to take a 30-minute sort of brain break. And then if we have to come back, we will. If we don't, even better, we'll sort of try to regroup and send you guys the final information. And then we'll sort of talk about next steps, see how you guys feel, and then we'll go from there. Anyone have any questions sort of about the layout of the day before we get started? Any other questions? Okay. First on the minutes, you should have the minutes from our last meeting in the packet. Just curious if you have any sort of updates, if you want clarification on any of the conversations, let me know now. Right? Seeing none. Well, I really want to jump into the rule. And like I said, I don't see Christine on yet, and I want to make sure that she can explain, because I know Christine and Colette have done some work since the last meeting, aside from what you all have in your packet, because that is lots of sort of random information and pieces pulled together. So let's, I'm going to share my screen. This is sort of our master document. I'm gonna pull that up too so I can see if she hops in. This is our master document. You'll see here in gray are all of the sections that you all discussed last week and formed consensus on. I do want to bring to your attention a few additional pieces that I've made changes to based on your direction and asking me to make some changes. And then also just sort of things that I've seen since going through it with more of a fine-tooth comb. So I'm going to go through those now, and I really want to make sure that you all have an opportunity to ask questions or weigh in on that, because I don't want to make changes aside from you guys having an opportunity to weigh in. So you'll see here 1063-101. Initially, Lance had suggested an application section that would sort of capture language that you see here that's highlighted. You all agreed to that language, but the more I thought about it, the way that we do rulemaking, it would be really unusual to sort of plug this in at the end in a new rule number. It does deserve to be at the front. And so because you also don't really want to change numbers of rules, That is also very unusual. I thought it made sense to just combine this 101 section with both application and procedures. It does make it a little longer, but I don't think that it takes away the intent of what you really want to see at the beginning of a rule making anyways. So here is what I just plugged that language that you all had discussed for applications in 1, and I moved the procedures language down 1, as you can see. Anyone have any questions on that? And because I'm sharing my screen, it's kind of hard to see hands and stuff. So go ahead and just unmute and ask questions if you have them. All right, I'm not seeing any on that. The next highlight down here, you'll see in new 3. And it's, I struck subchapter 3 and put in ARM 1063-110. And the reason for that is because this section is really talking about those skills outlined in the content standards, and it's also referring to the importance of those developmental domains. And I don't know what subchapter 3 means. That's not referring to actually anything. Subchapter 3 would actually be under 1063, and there's not even a subchapter 3. So instead, I just put in the actual rule number, 1063-110. That seems to make sense to me, whereas the other one did not. Anyone have any questions on that part? Okay. Everyone good if we sort of give a thumbs up, confirm this section for moving forward with consensus? Awesome. Thank you guys. And we'll make that gray. There's at least one more in here. Oh yeah. As we talked about the definitions last time, one of the things that Lance brought up was the importance of making sure that if you're defining a word, that the word is actually used throughout the rule. I also am a very big believer in that, and that's something that I've been really a stickler on as we've gone through other rules as well. So I did go through and just do a quick Control F and make sure these terms were in the rule in a meaningful way. You'll see that I've highlighted here under paraprofessional. It did say paraprofessional assistant teacher or teacher aide. And it's not that assistant teachers or teacher aides can't be used in certain ways to support a teacher, but those terms aren't used anywhere else in the rule. They're not even used in the paraprofessional qualification section. So I decided to strike that. Additionally, the paraprofessional qualification section was labeled as 115, but that's actually family and community engagement. So instead I made it its right section, which is 1063-105. Anyone have any questions about that? Okay. You guys good? Thumbs up if we move that one into consensus as well. Awesome. And then as we got to leadership, initially when we had talked about this new section 3, there was conversations around making sure that, these professional development opportunities can happen in conjunction with accredited educator preparation programs. And as we talked about this, I had initially just had it as accredited educator preparation providers, but the more we talked about it, we really wanted to make sure that it was those that are accredited under 1058-102, which is part of the Ed Prep program administrative rules. And so I just made really clear that ARM 1058-102, which outlines some of those procedures to be accredited, was included here. To sort of help solidify that intent that you guys were talking about. Anyone have any questions on this section? Okay, good to move this into consensus as well. Good about that. Okay, great. Sorry, I'm just going to scroll to get to our next section. All right. And that brings us to 110. I know Christina's in with us now. Perfect timing. Let me make sure I can see everyone. So, Christina, Lance, I know you guys just hopped on with us. What we just did was basically just go through. I had made a few additional changes, just sort of based on some of the conversations we had. I just wanted to make sure folks were okay with those. One, Lance, that probably I should mention again, given that it was definitely your doing, was the accreditation application. Not accreditation, the application of these rules. Sorry, I'm going to scroll back up. And the more I thought about it, it didn't make sense to have this in a later rule number. And it's really unusual to change. Now, I know it's really unusual to like change 101 to be application and then move procedures to 102 and move everything back. Just because people it's like statute. You just don't change necessarily a statute number based on sort of structure of rules. So I just added application here to 1 and moved the procedures down. I know it made this rule number a bit bigger, but I think that's the best way to do it so that it's at the beginning. And I wanted to make sure that everyone was okay with that. And given that this was sort of your suggestion, I wanted to see if you were okay with that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Also, it looks like you are somewhere sunny, although you have a jacket on.
Yeah, it's like Southern California, but out by the ocean. So
Lovely.
yeah.
All right. Well, we were just jumping into 110. Christine and Colette, you let me know how I can help you with this section. What do you need from me?
Let's see. Colette and I haven't even had a chance to connect because my early rising and just kind of yesterday I went through some other parts to it. I think you have it all in there. And it's in the agenda. It's in the agenda packet, right, McCall? Like, not the most recent things from today, but I can talk through some of that. If it's helpful for me to share my screen, whatever you think is best.
I did touch it before 10 o'clock, like literally minutes before 10 o'clock.
I have that if you guys want me to share that. Let me share the new document.
We communicated mostly remotely when we had moments.
Okay. So what you see on the screen, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go ahead, McCall.
I was just going to say what you see on the screen is what was sent to me this morning from Colette.
Great.
So you guys go and I'll drive.
Perfect. That sounds great. Colette, do you want me to do the walkthrough of just kind of where we organized it or how it is organized?
Sure.
Okay. So this was, Lance had done a nice job of doing some red line. McCall took a stab at it too. We had a lot of conversation last time about making sure that we're highlighting the developmental domains and that just how the domains are related to each other. And then how literacy foundations have impact to all of the domains. And I was able to go and look at our Montana content standards. I pulled from the MELS. Colette had identified some really great sections of our Montana early learning standards that help to bring that together so that we can understand developmental domains, highlighting communication, which is where that early literacy intervention focus will be, but also how these other domains interact with that too. So we wanted to be sure that in this, what you're looking at right now, this number 1 for the early learning developmental domains, thinking of, and you see in that green highlight, the development of communication, language, and literacy supports the growth in all other domains of development. So just making sure that we know that the critical eye to this administrative rule is going to be on the early literacy interventions, but remembering that these this rule is for all of early childhood education, both public preschool and early literacy intervention. So I put in some of that language there. McCall had added that applicable for public preschool and early literacy targeted interventions implemented through a classroom-based program. So that language is consistent. Lance, do you have a question to start off?
Just are we intending to have this apply all the way up through the Jumpstart program preceding the 3rd grade? We had discussed turning over the the Jumpstart program to regular elementary standards starting when they're in kindergarten. So we had talked about the summer Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten previously, but now it looks like it would be preceding kindergarten, first, second, and third grade.
Sorry, and can you say that again? Lance, are you thinking that this is something that I did on my, because I did go in and add and summer jumpstart program. So did I do that
I think
inaccurately?
it has to be the summer Jumpstart program preceding kindergarten. That's when they're still 4-year-olds.
Okay, so I need to go clarify that on,
Yeah,
The
because
rest of-
I
okay.
think otherwise you're, you know, with the rest of these kids are
yep,
elementary learners. And, you know, preceding first and second and third grade are elementary learners. And I think we had discussed allowing the elementary standards to control the instruction in those Jumpstart programs after the kids are no longer 4 years old.
like that was my fault. So I'll update that in the master doc to say jumpstart program preceding kindergarten.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No, thanks for the
That was
clarification.
helpful. Nell, did you have a question like from before I start walking through stuff?
Yeah, I do. How are you? It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right, guys, I know I wasn't on this specific section. I definitely had big questions about why communication is separated from language as a speech language pathologist. Those two to me are redundant. It's oral language, and oral language is both expressive and receptive. So I know that that was old language, but language precurses literacy and language predicts literacy. And is communication meaning I just feel like it needs to be defined. For me, when I see communication and language next to each other, I'm a little like, well, it's just redundant. It should be oral language with receptive and expressive domains. But if it's easier for the overall communication of the document, I'd leave it either way. But I just wanted to know if you had dialogue about that. I've always thought that was a confusing way to state that. And is communication really social emotional? Is there an alternate meaning to it in this piece? But I just put that on the table to maybe start a discussion about it, so we could further define them.
Absolutely. And I think when Colette and I were talking, we wanted to use existing resources that are used in our early childhood professional language and kind of in our systems, and then also making those connections to the language that's used in K-12. Right now, the developmental domains are communication, that encompasses that language literacy. And you can see that there is some definition here. The challenge, and Colette and I talked about this, and we certainly kind of started to, we started to dive into this last time, was administrative rule can't be exhaustive of what early literacy intervention instruction is going to look like. So we had to have it capture enough that it would be clear, understandable across these different disciplines. I think you raise a really important point now, which is why we have representation on this council as we do, so that the language is consistent and clear, and that the definitions are also going to hold up over time. And yes, we'll review administrative rules. So it's not so prescriptive as to like what is like buzzwordy now that might not look the same in a few years, but that's also capturing what is buzzworthy now, because that's why we have this focus. So if the domain name, kind of that big bucket category of communication, if you feel like that's misleading, I think that's or not as clear, even as defined here. So in that letter A, communication domain includes communication, language, and literacy development. And then we have communication, literacy, skill instruction includes, and this is where we have the receptive communication, expressive, social, and then support for dual language learners. And that's taken right from, that was existing rule, and that's from our Montana early learning standards in that way. But if you think, if communication, if that should be language domain, which is also, like you said, it's how some of the words are used. and then you'll see the literacy skill instruction there. And then you'll see what I did for the standards part too, because then it goes into a little bit more depth. What you're seeing in some of these highlights, when I was going through this, some of my stumbling block was the structure of administrative rule and the phrasing wasn't consistent. And so I tried to make it consistent. So it would be like, here's the component part of the domain. In this, what we're looking at, this Roman numeral 2, literacy skill includes opportunities for students to develop, and then it lists them. And then it also has some evidence of what students are going to be doing. And you might need more time to look at this now, because I know Colette and I stepped away from it after, was it just last week? Did we meet just last week? Was it just last week? And then coming back to it with some fresh eyes. But I don't know. I mean, do we want to have conversation about just the labeling and titling of the communication domain? Colette, do you have anything to add to that? Did I misspeak, or did I not add something that?
Yeah, no, that was very accurate. We were just, but like Nell had stated, it was confusing maybe in the initial rule. And then here we are just using the same language again. If we're going to clear this up, this is a great opportunity to do that. Right. And it would be simple enough, as just removing like the communication and calling it language. Is that kind of what you were steering towards now?
Yeah,
language and literacy.
Thanks for reading my mind, Colette. I think not just language, but oral language, and in deeper understanding. I see this always as a practitioner in the field with teachers, to say communication is a very simplistic idea of that deep understanding of what language is. Language is everything that is received and expressed and held in the brain. And to teach that deep and broad to support literacy is profound. But if I can talk to a kid, that's communication, is what I oftentimes have these talks with teachers about. And so when I saw that in the rule, I was like, gosh, maybe if we change this language, it will start to help people understand that we can address oral communication and its domains. Where the research stands is that they predict all academic success and social and emotional. So if we were really taking that stance, then we could change that language and just clean up the wording a little bit.
So Christine, if I can jump in here just for a quick second. I think in our last meeting, you all had a lot of consensus around the domains. I think people really agreed that the domains were solid. And now I'm not trying to say that we don't, there might be some tweaking of the language here to sort of get to what you're saying, because I think that is really important too. What I'm saying is just broadly, I think this section was not the one that folks were really sort of trying to wrap their heads around. I think everyone agreed that, these made sense in the way that it was written. I did redline it here so that you could see what that would look like with sort of the numbering and the lettering, and just to kind of get that in a rule format. But Nell, to your point, if changing language makes things changing words makes things more clear, I think that's fine. I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen though, is because these are the sort of high level umbrella standards and school districts will then be adopting curriculum. It's really that curriculum that's going to have to sort of address some of those things that you're talking about. And if we can change words in the rule to help guide that, then I very much am on board for that. If you don't think that's going to happen, then it's probably worth a broader conversation.
I'm not offended either way, but I am going to be the provocateur out on the edge. The reality is that we can't do targeted early intervention for our most at-risk children if we don't understand the language foundation of literacy. And that is deep in me, because from working on our reservations to really seeing struggling readers struggle, working on the alphabet's not what they need. working on their language skills and developing them in reading intervention, it doesn't take a literacy curriculum. It takes a language-rich curriculum, which we don't have a lot on the market for. And so my greatest concern in not addressing language and being sincere about it, what our goal in this is that we're not speaking to or giving description of what that early part of a child's development and literacy is, and what we would expect their development instructional components to be. So that is, and I say that because I get so overwhelmed and sad when I see 4-year-olds and many early learning programs where teachers are just teaching the alphabet or teaching phonology. And I'm like, that's nice, but this will be down the road. How we build, how they think and how they put words together, and how words have meaning, and how they produce expressive language and receive and understand and take multi-step directions and on. And language will support reading comprehension in 8th grade. 2-year-old vocabulary and understanding of task analysis predicts reading comprehension in 8th grade. So that is, this is my pulpit. I'm a language. I just spoke with the world's leading researcher in language yesterday. I've recorded it. If anybody wants it, I'd be willing to share it, about early assessment in language and how to do it, and how we can help all teachers have that access. So we don't have to do anything about it. I won't be offended, but I am here to push the edge, because the way we'll change real education and literacy is if we start early and do the right things first, instead of keeping our cookie cutter curriculums around the alphabet and phonology and a few things here and there to do interventions that people are going to buy based on this new rule. So it's just it's a very passionate area for me. So again, I'm not offended if you keep it the way it is. There's enough in here that I can help people do the right thing. But again, calling it communication, it doesn't have the depth I think that it needs to have.
I would argue for, if we call this the language domain, that has implication for how our Montana early learning standards are rewritten. But I also, speaking to your passionate points, Nell, and I really appreciate it, is that all the things that you're talking about of how rule is interpreted, what curriculum is chosen, how that curriculum is implemented, that all comes back to our teacher education pieces of it. And so all the research that you cited, these are part of our teacher ed in our P3 in particular, in those programs, and that rule can't be exhaustive in providing that level of specificity around the importance of all the skills. Rule just doesn't do that. But what we can do is make sure that in understanding how to follow rule, it looks like this. And that's where I think that passionate space of what that means to have that skill set, what that means to understand the importance of language, what that means in the scope of curriculum as articulated through this continuum, through 3rd grade, through, and beyond. I think that these are all really valid points that we should make sure find their way into that implementation piece of it. I just don't know that rule in this place of outlining, identifying the developmental domains as critically important to the development of the whole child to bring about support and change around 3rd grade. I just don't think that rule can do some of that. And correct me if I'm wrong on that, McCall. I just want to make sure that all of the input and insight from this council and the skills and the things that we know need to be included in the literacy intervention, this place in rule is not the place to do all of that.
I don't think you're wrong. And Marie just put her hand up, and I'm guessing she might answer something. But then I also saw that Tammy and Lance had their hands. Marie, were you going to speak directly to what Christine just said?
Yeah, but they can go ahead because I want to hear what Lance's perspective is on the whole piece too.
Tammy, go ahead, and then we'll turn it over to Lance.
Thanks, because I'll be briefer than Lance. usually am. I really do support what Nell was saying about the possibility of changing this from communication domain to language domain. And with that, I would change A to receptive language, B to expressive language, and C to social language in alignment, because then we're actually aligning back to language comprehension, which is receptive, and language communication, which is expressive. And I think those two things, that would be a really powerful alignment that would be supported by the research. Done.
Lance, go ahead.
I actually am fine with use of either terminology and whatever you all think is appropriate. What I wanted to make sure that we continually remind ourselves of is that these rules are not intended to create exemplars. They are supposed to create the minimum standards that if you fall below, you get in jail. These are minimum standards only, the violation of which represents a violation of law. And so, you know, that's been reiterated again and again. The Montana Supreme Court has characterized the accreditation standards as the minimum standards upon which the basic system of free quality schools is built. I like to use it as an algebra equation. Quality equals the accreditation standards plus local control. And local control is where the exemplars are supposed to come from, where the highest possible level of quality is supposed to be endowed. So I don't know that necessarily touches on which term we use, but just that we need to remind ourselves of where we are in our lane here and what level of quality we're seeking to establish, which is the minimum level below which you are in violation of the law.
So I'll follow
Marie,
that.
oh,
Yeah, perfect. I'll follow that up with what we can do from the agency level is we are taking experts in like you, Nell, and anyone else here to be on the task force to create guidance documents. So for example, we're doing math right now and we're doing the minimum set of standards for ARM with a really robust implementation plan on what those guidance documents could be, including pathways through high school, including early numeracy pathways, including guidance on how to intervene at those levels. Again, not in ARM, not in rule, but using the experts and researcher at hand to develop those, which is where people like you all would be wonderful to have supporting, reviewing those documents, ensuring that I know as a teacher, I never once went to ARM. I went to OPI, downloaded the guidance documents and used that in my classroom. Yeah. So I want those to be robust so that you can reach every level of learner. That's the intent from OPI, and you got to make sure it follows all the rules of the law within that too, and that it's just a really accessible and clear document for our teachers in the field trying to do this work. Does that help?
I think it helps a lot. And I think, you know, Nell's giving a thumbs up. Thank you.
Can I add a piece?
Sure.
For alignment and clarity, really, when you get to A, communication domain includes communication, language, and literacy development. It's a garbled way of thinking about it. And I would suggest the language domain includes communication and comprehension in both oral and written language. And then you've got an umbrella that captures the idea. The foundational idea is that literacy floats on a sea of talk, written 1976 or something ridiculous. But
but then those subpoints, do you still have receptive communication? Do you still have expressive? Do you still have social? Do you have, you know, like, how do you then
receptive language, expressive language, social language? And because communication is the expressive part, comprehension is the receptive part. And so to get clarity on those things, just in the way the language is aligned, it would really actually make it much more elegant and I think comprehensible for teachers.
keep that in mind as we continue to talk about this section? And Penn, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, So what are Dr. Lex, I think you spoke to this. What are the implications if we are to incorporate Nell and Tammy's changes into this section? What were the implications? And just kind of, I agree. I'm trying to read this as somebody who wouldn't necessarily have any professional development with language. So, but I think as a practitioner, again, you're not necessarily going to come to ARM, but ARM is our basis, right? And it should be the minimum possible. So I would prefer that it, mirror something that is clear and concise. And so can somebody just share those implications with making recommended changes? Because I'm in support of those, but I just want to hear those implications of that.
And I think that's a great way to ask the question, Ann Penn. And I think it's right now, communication domain is the language that's used in the Montana Early Learning Standards, but language domain is the preferred labeling of the umbrella for here. And so from what Tammy just said, if this letter A, the language domain includes, and you had another way of putting that, and then if the words includes oral language and what did you?
I can give it to you just so you can put it and people can see it in print. If the language domain includes communication and comprehension in both oral and written language. And that way we can at least tweak or think about it. That would replace little a.
Mm-hmm. And then it would be communication skill instruction includes opportunities for students. And then it would list receptive language, expressive language, social language, and support for dual language.
Right, because communication is only talking about expressive. I mean, we think of it as this interactive, I'm going to teach them how to talk and talk back, but that's the reciprocal process, right? But technically, it should be communication and comprehension. So language, which is language, bigger umbrella.
And so we just need to, so in going back to what Ann Penn was asking about implications, it says implication for Montana Early Learning Standards revision, which is happening, and then also for Montana Content Standard revision, which is happening. And again, we'll see that when we get to the standards piece where I pulled in some of that language. Language domain, okay.
Can I just throw in there that I did share that these processes with DPHHS this week. I met with them and Christy Mock Steps to make sure they knew to watch where we are changing things in chapter 63, and what those proposals are. So they know that this could change their pathway of their work too.
Great. And I agree, there's a point of wanting to do this well, but I also know that we need to do it. I know that we need to, continue to move forward to make sure that we're capturing the charge of this council, but also listening to that input. And I'm sure too, in that space for public comment and all of those different pieces, trying to get this right at this stage makes sense to me. I would say we should move forward, unless Doug, I just saw your hand up as well.
I don't have anything to add except for the fact, hey, McCall, what I'm seeing on the screen here is not in the handout information that you sent, correct?
Correct. This is what Christine and Colette have worked on since the last meeting.
All right, well, I'll put that aside then. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, you will not find this in your handout. So Christine, I know you were just saying we should probably move on, but I do want to clarify because I think it's really important that everyone sort of has an opportunity to weigh in and we form consensus around these changes. And these seem obviously very specific to the expertise on here. And I have nothing to add other than like making sure that the rule reads correctly. But I do want to make sure that I understand what the changes need to be. So I'm going to ask that Nell or Tammy, whoever wants to, can sort of clarify for me so that I can take notes and that can be reflected in whatever I send back to you guys after. So are you guys wanting to change the communication domain to read the language domain? And then what I have here is sort of this alternative A, includes communication and comprehension in oral and written language. And then I would read what?
You want me to, can I jump in?
Yeah, I don't care who, yeah.
Language instruction, it's really not language skill instruction, just get rid of communication. Language instruction includes opportunities for students to develop, followed by A, receptive language, B, expressive language, and all of the descriptors with that can stay, and C, social language.
And then D remains the same.
And D remains the same.
Okay. How do folks feel about that? Does anyone have questions? Anyone have concerns? Anyone have reason to not consent to this language?
McCall, just a quick question. Does what we're putting in here right now still allow a local school district flexibility in terms of their communication domain instruction with 4-year-olds to develop a program that fits the local community? I mean, what one community may want in terms of language and literacy development and emphasis may not be the same as what another community would want to put their emphasis on. Does that flexibility still exist with this language?
Yeah, and even though I don't have the expertise, I'm gonna say yes. I think what's happening here is a change in terminology to be even more clear of what this section should really be talking about and communicate. It's my understanding that's like we're changing the words to be more clear about. It's not necessarily just communication, but it's full language development. And I see heads nodding, so I think they're agreeing with my assumption. So I do think that. And I don't want to say this sort of flippantly, but I think regardless if we use communication or language, it still allows that flexibility for school districts. This terminology, in my understanding, is just more clear. And Nell, if you want to expand on that, please do.
Thank you.
To your point, Doug, I think that's an excellent question because language is very unique to each individual's family, their ecosystem, their entire history. The new term in the field around variation in language is called linguistic diversity. And, you know, even if you threw in just a slight nuance there, like language domain includes communication and comprehension in oral and written language, inclusive of all children's linguistic diversity, formerly known as dialects, formerly known as variations in speech across culture. But to your point, I think that it's very inclusive, regardless if that language was added or not. But just to give you that language right now, that's that new term.
Now, any other questions, thoughts? I'll obviously clean this up and send a sort of better copy to you guys after this. Thoughts, questions? Okay, are you guys good to move on? How do you feel about moving on from the domains? Good? All right. Christine, where do you want to go next?
So this just continues within this domain, which we're calling language domain. There's literacy skill instruction. And again, these headers for each of these are now consistent. So that highlighted opportunities for students to develop. So we've got these different pieces. So that may now be redundant, but once things get cleaned up, I think that we need to just like look at it in that way. Moving into on this second page, McCall, in early childhood education, we talk about social and emotional development and social emotional domain, not emotional social. And again, just like choosing our words is really important here. So that's why that's crossed out and then capitalized. There aren't
one
changes.
thing I will, sorry,
Oh, go
I
ahead.
am going to jump in really quick. I noticed that you guys capitalized some of the terminology in here, and the drafters of rules, they're just going to move those all down to lowercase again.
They are.
That's
Okay.
just how it sort of is. So I'm just letting you know that those will probably all end up being lowercase. And I saw the same for like Jumpstart program. Those will all end up being lowercase. just so you know.
Good to know. Great. And that's that specificity around just the
Yeah.
technical nature of rule. Totally fine. So here, nothing is different here. So going back to your question, Doug, what's in the agenda packet? There isn't a lot of change here. This was just looking at trying to be the wording and clunkiness of the existing rule, just trying to make it more consistent. So that skill instruction includes opportunities for students to develop, and then it just is worded just that it flows a little bit better, so it reads a little bit more cleanly, but none of the content of these for the social emotional domain, and then moving into the next one for physical domain, that hasn't changed. Health, safety, all of those different things, none of that has changed. So that's been in our agenda packets. That's been the existing rule piece of it. I don't think we need a lot of discussion around the developmental domains. As you said, McCall, we had consensus that these domains are important, that they're included, that they're that first part of rule, and then we move into the content standards. So this red line is because we move this domain to the front because it's early literacy intervention focused. Cognitive pieces are here. Again, that content didn't change. And then this next part, we move into the standards. So I don't know if we need to have any final comment or conversation around the developmental domain section. So that's all of number 1. So 1063, 110, number 1 is all early learning developmental domains. Before we move into the content and standards, is there anything else we need to do for that other stuff?
Anyone have any questions on the developmental domains?
Nope, just great work, Christine, and you guys, great work on that.
Thanks. I'm not
All
going
right.
to quit my day job and become a lawyer or rule writer. Don't worry, everyone. Okay, so this next part, the content standards, McCall, you had put in there saying more here about literacy development through content standards. So I pulled some language from our Montana kindergarten content standards. And in particular, there's a statement, and I didn't cite it in here, and I was going to ask here on this call today, Marie, you might be our OPI expert of just how we pull that. But Colette and I had a lot of conversation about, again, similar to in thinking about developmental domains and how these overlap intentionally, content standards do the same. And so trying to think about this content standards section with respect to early literacy intervention, but also recognizing it's the early literacy and language foundational focus that impacts all of our content areas. And that's said in our Montana kindergarten ELA standards. And you'll see it's that sentence that starts, just as students must learn literacy skills and conceptual understandings to be college and career ready, they must be able to read, write, speak, listen, and use language effectively in a variety of content areas. So McCall, when you had asked about, can we add something that speaks to literacy development through content standards, that already existed. That was already in our Montana ELA K standards. I would argue to use that here as well. Recognizing that review is happening, but that really seemed to capture exactly what this group is trying to get at, that the literacy skills, language skills, if we need to change some of that language, we can, but I thought that was really powerful about reading, writing, speaking, listening, and using language effectively in a variety of content areas.
And just so I understand process, should those change after task force, superintendent, all the things, these can be reopened to align McCall, or is it something that you would, I don't know how that.
Well, I guess
Or,
I wouldn't say that we should reopen them like right after ELA standards go into
Yeah.
effect. I think based on what we see come out of ELA standards, if there's overwhelming reason to review these, then we would, based on the reoccurring schedule that we all agreed upon earlier in this, that, we would make changes upon the next revision schedule. I don't know. Is there a situation where these would be very much out of alignment with?
I can't say that yet. So.
I mean, are you guys planning a huge overhaul?
I'm not planning anything. I'm planning to look at the research.
Murray, what are you
And support
planning?
the team. Oh, no.
And I guess those would be my questions, or like, I don't know what I don't know either. So
Yeah.
I don't know what the ELA revisions might look like. Yeah, there's always a possibility that, sometimes things may not be in alignment given that these are here and those are there. But I think that's something that we'll just have to figure out when we get there.
And then we can communicate on guidance again, like if that's where it comes down to for the early intervention guidance and those pieces, we can just try to work together to be very clear on what a teacher needs to know. And I think that's fine.
Okay, I think a big question that we sort of need to determine before moving forward is the idea of having the developmental domains at the beginning and then having the content standards here secondary. And I think folks agreed that like that made sense last time. And I just want to make sure that we're still in agreement with that. You saw 1 were developmental domains. Now we'll see 2 as content standards. What questions do you guys have on, I'm trying to clean this up a little bit as we have conversations so that you guys can actually read it in a more meaningful way. So let me know what questions you have. And I'm hoping Christine and Colette can answer them.
And again, this beginning part of number 2, that narrative, we wanted to be able to explicitly state how important all of the content standards are as built on this foundation in language and literacy. And so if we have not done that well with the language that's here, or if you think, and Lance, this is where I turn to you and McCall from an administrative rule perspective, because rule doesn't tend to be real narrative based. I want to make sure that that narrative is clear and concise, but that it touches upon the importance of the content areas. It touches upon the importance of language and literacy as a foundation, and that it's applicable for public preschool and for early literacy targeted interventions. And maybe, and some of this is new language outside of what was sent in the agenda packet. I just didn't have time, Colette and I collectively did not have time to go through all of it with much lead time for you all to look at it.
Sorry, Marie, I see your hand.
No, you're good. I think Lance was going to respond first.
You go ahead, because I'm still not tracking. I know that we had the discussion about the potential danger associated with making all of the content areas applicable to targeted literacy for the perception of legislators. And I'm not sure I understand where you're going on this, whether we're making a statement. Well, I mean, I guess let me put it this way. And I can't tell which is already in there versus what's being put in there now. But if all early learning content standards are applicable to early targeted interventions, I think you're going to have an optics problem with legislators who believe that you'll be bootstrapping this thing into universal pre-K. Now, I could be misunderstanding that, but I'm looking at that language. All early learning content standards are applicable for a public preschool program and early literacy targeted interventions. And help clarify for me, just so that I understand, that's at odds with the way that I segmented it previously, which was to say the developmental standards are universally applicable. That was learning readiness. And that the content standards, we needed to say that literacy is the content standard that's applicable here, and rely on the developmental domains to understand the surrounding learning environment that must support the ability to become on grade level for reading.
And so what I did, Lance, to that point, in looking at the Montana ELA kindergarten standards, that's where I got that statement about students must be able to read, write, speak, listen across all the content areas. So as a state and with our content standards, it is already widely understood that ELA, language, literacy, those standards apply and are used in a variety of content standards. And so and I know what you're saying, and I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate here. But just thinking about the scrutiny that legislators might put on that, my response would be, we already as a state recognize ELA standards as applied in a variety of content areas. And so early childhood education shouldn't be different.
The distinction is that funding for kindergartners and first graders hasn't been in question since 1975. And the curriculum is universal. You teach elementary education across every content area that anybody wants to use. And in this particular instance, we've got a narrow, segmented breach of the 4-year-old barrier that has existed vigorously. And I mean, the legislature, we do polling every year. And I know that the legislature's in a different place, at least I believe them to be, than where likely voters are. That they overwhelmingly support universal pre-K. The legislature does not. In fact, I would say they overwhelmingly oppose it. And would never have passed this bill if they believed it would be used in a way that would amalgamate into a pre-K program. Even use of the term pre-K would have killed this bill. And when you look at the people who co-signed on the bill, I mean, the writing's on the wall. Brandon Lear co-signed on this bill. Brandon Lear is a former trustee of mine from in the northeast corner of the state, and I know he absolutely vehemently opposes pre-K. And I think that we're going to get ourselves into the point here where we're going to push so far that we're going to get a rebound here. And I'm already in the midst of one, which is why this bill was created in part based upon perceptions that districts were using exceptional circumstances enrollments to provide pre-K in disguise instead of kindergarten curriculum. So I just really would respectfully suggest that we not do this. I think it's a mistake. I think that and you're not getting anything from it. It's a minimum standard that you're setting here. And if you set a minimum standard that says in order to teach a child to read, you have to teach them all the other subject areas as well, the legislature is not going to buy it.
I was kind of on the same page, wondering if this was necessary, if it's already in the English language arts content standards. And again, newer to this position and role making, it feels like they could work against one another rather together. So we've discussed having early literacy pointed out specifically in the K-12 content standards revisions. So would it be better to have it in here or to have that be a focus in those revisions? I'm just worried about, like you said, the perception of those pieces and if it's duplicative work. If it's already in chapter 53, could we just link chapter 53?
Well, one question I have for you, Marie, maybe a comment first, is because the early literacy programs aren't mandatory, they're optional for school districts. I do think that if we put them in the K-12 standards, there could be consequences of requiring school districts to adhere to those if they're not even providing a 4-year-old program.
Yep, and I agree with that. And I'm more thinking that this could be interpreted as K-3 early literacy. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading between the lines a little bit too much on that.
Yeah,
I would conceptually urge you to be satisfied that teachers are going to know how to teach, that programs are going to know how to prepare teachers to teach, that the specificity of those content standards is going to create a red herring that is going to create controversy around this and impede its implementation. And I would devote yourselves to the developmental domains to give you the minimum standards necessary to remind people as they're implementing targeted literacy programs that they have to be able to teach kids in a developmentally appropriate way that reaches them according to their age and their capability of comprehension and the surrounding supports that you need in order to make that happen.
Great. Colette, I see your hand up, and then we'll go to Lori.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, even when we left our last Zoom, you know, I said to Christine and McCall both, you know, there is no other number in our chapter here where we have elaborated to this level. I would argue that so I'm playing devil's advocate here as well, because like I would argue that in like paraprofessional supervision and in leadership and all those, like I want way more than 2 bullets there, but I'm going to know as a leader what to do with those baseline ones and expand from there. And so I feel similarly, and then my question is it enough that we just acknowledge, and guys, like literacy is touching all subject areas. And then we as educators know what to do with that information, because we have been a part of literacy grants from the day we opened. That's what started us, was early the early reading first grants. We weren't only doing reading, we were doing all of those, because that's what we knew was best practice. So I just think we all feel so passionate about this that we want this to exist, because ethically, I want that to be there. But I'm going to have to trust, like Lance is saying, we're going to have to trust that these educated professionals will know, and there's all those other things that have to be included to complement this and to do it well. And so I, as much as I want them to be there, because that was what was part of the original chapter, I just have to trust that best practice is that you incorporate all of those things. As long as we acknowledge it in a sentence or two, is that enough? And secondly, I do have one more question though.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
That we have been saying public preschool program, applicable for a public preschool program, like in just blatantly saying that. I am so curious, Lance, are there actually places and communities that are having public preschool programs that wouldn't be seeking out this funding?
Yeah, they do preschool through grant programs, collaborations with Head Start, other patch it together. I mean, we've got school districts that do so, and you got 2 places in the code that says you can't use state aid in any manner, and you can't include them in the A and B count. So it's both in 20-9-311, and it's also in 20-7-117. I think it is the section there where it just is absolutely clear that you cannot use foundation aid, K-12 base aid to support a public preschool program, but that you can offer one.
Okay, so it's okay to blatantly say that, because we would want them to refer to this as a resource, but they can use other resources if they're not seeking the funding.
And that if they are offering a public preschool program, they do have to meet these standards, because these standards have been in since the passage during the consideration of early edge several years ago.
Mm-hmm. So even though they're not seeking state funding?
Yes, there's still an accreditation standard applicable to how they conduct them. Sort of analogous. I don't mean to breach the gap between learning and caring, okay? But it's sort of like the fact that you don't get money to operate a daycare program in a school, but you still have to follow the regulations associated with the daycare program for your after-school care program. And that's kind of the same way this works for public preschool. We've got a handful of districts out there that do it. And, you know, most of them started to do exceptional circumstances instead, but not all of them.
I know you had your hand up, and then we'll go to Tammy.
I think, first of all, this is the quietest I've been for this long in one of our meetings, and I feel like somebody should acknowledge that. And, seriously, and I just want to say, I go back to, and remember, I'm a English teacher at heart, so I'm real passionate about English language arts standards and how they flow into every single subject we teach. However, I go back to less is more. If we put something here, it says we have to do it, and then it may have the appearance of doing more than what has been in legislative intent. If we don't put it here, it doesn't mean we can't do it, right? And so, like, I mean, I walked into an 8th grade math class last week, and they were reading something that was informative text, right? That you might say, oh my gosh, that's ELA, that has nothing to do with math. And then they used it in math, perfectly acceptable. But if I were to put in the math standards, you have to use informative text to do this, then they would have to. And so I think less is more, and that it doesn't mean we can't include these things to support literacy, but I worry if we put them, then everyone has to use them. And then it does have the perception of being much more than literacy. And so I just don't want to lose the opportunity down the road to continue this program.
Tammy, go ahead.
So I had a language idea, and it would be to, sadly, remove this and include just a single sentence statement. It is understood that background knowledge and vocabulary are essential and developed through all domains and content area study, and then reference the ARM, the standards.
Are you talking about referencing the K-12 content standards?
I would, wherever these live in early childhood, I would reference those, but possibly also reference the Reading Foundation standards, which are K-5,
Okay.
right?
I think we can
Well-
only reference Montana K-12 because, as we talked about last time, Montana Early Learning Standards aren't
They're
a
not,
Board
they
of
don't
Public Ed
carry
or
weight.
OPI
Yeah,
approved.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
But I
maybe
appreciate-
maybe simply without the reference, and it would be, it's a broad statement, but all it is that it's understood that background knowledge and vocabulary are essential and developed through all domains, which are up above, and content area study.
The only issue with doing something like that, Tammy, is then you no longer have the language here in the content standards. And so you're also taking that away for public preschool programs. Because as we just talked about, it's important that, like Lance just said, public preschool programs do have to adhere to all of these, all the domains, all the content standards. And what Lance was talking about was just specifically saying, you know, all domains, and likely, I think what your last edit was, Lance, was to pertain to the ELA standards. But public preschools have to do both. And I think if we got rid of that, it wouldn't be as clear.
I keep forgetting that this is embedded in the other set. I'm thinking about the literacy.
Yeah. Which is good, because that is why we're here. So thank you. Lori, did you put your hand up again? Oh. All right.
So McCall, I was just going to jump in, just kind of digesting all of this. And I take my role on the council as one of like, well, let's try it. Let's see like what could be included. What is the message that we're trying to, what is it that we're trying to say? And just kind of that step away. And Colette, I think you put it really, really well too, is that, and Laura, you've communicated this when we've had outside conversations too, of as a leader, you know what you would do, and you know what is ethically what you would do to elevate and raise the quality. And so what at a minimum needs to be included here. And I think that mentioning the alignment to Montana's K-12 standards, I think is really important. It validates where we're getting this, why we're putting early childhood education standards here. I think some of this narrative obviously needs to go. And I so appreciate, Lance, the respectful way that you're explaining, and Marie as well, and others on this council and board, is just thinking about acknowledging in that sentence or two, but not imposing a requirement that is going to be contentious or controversial. And so I veer towards that controversial lens, just because it's trying to figure out like how much of the language gets put in and where does that controversy start? And that's what we want to avoid. And so I'm open to including a statement here. The alignment to the K-12 standards I feel is really important. It validates this continuum, but then also the requirement for early literacy intervention to be focused to language and literacy. And I included this ELA standards. I'm trying to use language that's consistent with the K-12 language too. If this feels like that doesn't make sense, then we can address that. But I think this narrative, it sounds to me after that first sentence, this, representing highlight what students should know, understand, and be able to do upon entering kindergarten feels appropriate. And then what gets included around what's applicable for the early literacy intervention, I go back to what's in the agenda packet. The content standard, all content standards apply for a public preschool program, while only, is this where we say, while only the ELA standards apply to the early literacy targeted interventions? It pains me to say it in that way, but I think to reduce that controversy, if that's where we're headed, seeing that in print and having conversation about that sounds like where we're at.
Thanks for that, Christine. What questions do folks have about that approach? So I see no questions. I'm wondering if folks have concern with that approach. And what I can do is we can sort of move on to some of those additional changes that you guys put in here, Christine. And then on our break, I can do some wordsmithing and come back with a more clean version. If folks are amenable to that.
And
go ahead, Lance.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to run here because my daughter's interviewing with a law firm down here, and I'm shuttling her. I'm her Uber ride, so I'm going to have to sign off. I trust you guys are doing the right thing here. I think this is the right way to go. I did speak earlier, or not spoke, but communicated in email with Doug, and hopefully Doug's okay with Doug Rosberg, by the way, not Reisig. With what he and I were working on, and tried to explain what I was trying to accomplish with some strikeouts there, and ensuring that we still had the emphasis on all of the developmental domains being universally applicable. So if something comes up and you guys need to text me or something, I'm sure I can take a moment to answer that. But I really appreciate your time, and I'm sorry I have to sign off.
Thanks so much, Lance.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your insight.
Thank you, Lance. Good luck to your dog.
Happy Ubering. Okay. Questions, thoughts, comments before we move on?
My thinking around the whole was just that I'm hearing you say less is more. But again, I just have to know as a program leader what I need to do to set everybody up for success. And I just have to trust that anybody else who picks this up and reads this, or any guidance document, would know that. And anybody who's had an education through our, our college programs will get all this background knowledge and just know that this can't stand alone. So I just have to, I keep using the word trust, but I just have to trust that if we are informed educators, that we're going to know what to do with this.
Go ahead, Doug. I saw you unmute. Oh.
Are you talking to me, McCall?
Yeah, I was.
Let me just ask you this question then. Again, like you said, as a program leader, do you think it's important to even have this section called instructional content standards for the early literacy targeted intervention, or will the section dealing with developmental domains satisfy what we need? Just a comment without commitment.
No, I think it's very necessary. I think it validates that we are teachers, that we are educators, and that there are content standards, that we are responsible for building that foundation for kindergarten. That vertical alignment is critical. So the background knowledge they have, they will developmentally appropriately, provide those opportunities for children in the classrooms to build those foundational skills. So I think that is the terminology we use in the educational world. We do talk about content standards. And we were so excited when the early learning guidelines were then updated to be early learning standards, because we could be having those rich conversations with other educators too, that just validates all of that. We know what to do with it. It's just, yes, I think it's necessary.
So then the short statement that Christine provided, would that work?
Yeah, I think it's just simply an acknowledgement that all of these are connected. Just acknowledge it. I don't love it, but I'm going to live with it. Like, I can live with it, just to know that we've had this conversation that's acknowledged, and we're going to do what we can with that.
Thank you.
Nelson, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a clarifying question, which I had asked in our last meeting, and the response and conversation that happened based on that question sounds a little bit different than what's being talked about today. So that's why I just want to clarify. So if the other content standards other than English language arts are being taken out, and a administrator is implementing a early childhood program collecting A and B based on 352, and they are implementing curriculum instruction based on those ELA content standards, and they're doing so in the context of a math activity, like how Lori provided a great example of, using informational text and connecting it in an integrated way. Is that okay? Like, is that something, would that be seen as kind of skirting the rules? Or I just want to make sure, I'm just wondering, is by taking the content standards out, does it make it unallowable to address those? Because we're having a lot of conversation about trusting that they'll be doing it, but also, are they allowed to do that? Because, yeah, that's all.
That's a really good question, because I was remembering the conversation that we had last time too, and it did sound different. I think the difference in what I'm hearing today is that maybe we're talking about a couple different things. So the ELA standards, let's just say these new rules, these ELA standards will apply only to the early literacy targeted intervention programs. But what I'm hearing others say is that you can still do coursework from other content standards, right? Like, let's just say students are learning about art through reading about an artist, and they're, so like, I think you can definitely embed some of that coursework from math and from art and from science and social studies into the early literacy standards, but there has to be a heavy literacy component. I wouldn't say that you should go purchase a bunch of different content standard or curriculum for these early literacy programs, but it certainly wouldn't prohibit you from doing that type of work through the ELA standards. Okay. Does that make more sense?
It does make sense to me, and I wouldn't be worried about an early childhood program purchasing a bunch of unique content standard curriculums, because that's just not how we teach. But we do teach in an integrated way, and we know that that's best practice. And so I just wanted to ensure that we weren't doing anything that would cause future repercussions to programs trying to do the right thing. So thank you.
I think as long as you're reporting, always you can justify that what you were doing has a literacy and language and vocabulary, all of those sort of really important concepts are part of whatever you are doing to instruct students.
Okay, I feel good about it.
Marie, I see your hand up.
I know I had to leave early last time, but my question is, and I think it would make me feel better about all of it, is there a reason we kept public here about in the middle there on public preschool instead of early childhood as we had previously?
The camera right here. Sorry, right here?
Yeah, yep, you're right. Well, now it's, that right there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was asking Lance too.
Like, if we change that to early childhood, I feel like, I don't know, it'd be consistent for one thing too, and I could have missed something.
Yeah, no, this language is going to change a little bit, and the reason why it says public preschool program and then there's separate early literacy targeted interventions is because that's how the original language was that sort of separated them, and that will be the case in this sort of next iteration as well. So you can, sorry, I realize like what's on the screen is actually not what's going to be there this afternoon when I come back to it. Just based on sort of taking a quick break and doing some wordsmithing and then bringing it back. But I'm going to actually share my other document now so that we can continue talking about this and then come back to this piece. Sorry, I realized that was very confusing, so I'm sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something. So
No, and that's on me because the Word document that Colette and I were working on and the one I shared with McCall didn't have all of her like find and replace from
tell me about it. And if you go from online Word to desktop Word, it changes everything. So okay, thank you for helping me understand that better.
Oh yeah, I've been in formatting hell the last week.
You're welcome, McCall. I'm glad we could add to that.
Oh no, it is not just this. I'll tell you that. There's so many other things. This probably does not surprise you, but when this actually goes into a rulemaking template, it is even different formatting. So it's just, all fun. Okay, let's get past all of this. Let's go to 111. Is Doug Rosberg still on? I know he was gonna have to jump.
Yes.
Oh, he is on.
Here.
Hi, Doug.
Sorry. Hello.
Okay, I'm gonna turn this section over to you to explain to the group, and then we'll turn it over for questions.
I'll do my best. So this is just all basically what Lance had, and we had an email conversation yesterday because I felt like this section was pretty straightforward, minus that piece in C where he redlined a bunch of things. And the one that I was most confused about was language, because I just felt like that was still applicable within there. His response to me was kind of like what we were just discussing regarding that it's already represented in the domains and not necessarily here. But that's what I've got so far. Otherwise, it's literally pretty find and replace specific.
That makes sense. Given that this is related to the content areas, would we want to change this to English or how does that, you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah.
Let's
see.
I think having this here, I just want to make a comment. I think this, Allison, I think this covers what you were asking. I think if we can reflect back on, well, it's saying right here, like they're encouraging integration of literacy, math, science, social studies. So seeing that there really gives me
And I
peace of-
think that it falls within that development appropriate practice. I just wanted to be sure from that
Yeah.
other section too.
Yeah,
So
but I mean, this takes the guesswork right out of it. I mean, it's right there. So that feels good right there.
All right. So I'm sorry, Doug, are you saying that you are okay then with keeping this
Yeah, I'm totally
strikeout?
fine with what he came up
Okay.
with. I had some questions around language, but that was, he kind of answered that for me. And this is all new to me, so I feel like I'm not the most articulate explainer here, but
Doing great. I had this highlighted just for myself, so I'll unhighlight that because that's not going to change the definition section. Lori, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I know, Doug, I was listening to what you said. I just don't understand. And I don't have an opinion either way. I just don't understand why it's important to take out the social, emotional, physical health, safety language, but leave in the other examples of literacy, mathematics, science, social studies, creative arts, technology. I just don't, again, I'm not saying we should or shouldn't. I'm just, why take it out if you got other examples in there?
I guess I felt like that what was redlined there was redundant from the first sentence of it.
Okay.
It seemed like it just kind of repeated the same thing twice.
Because it already says emotional, social, physical communication and cognition.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Did we, again, I'm not making an argument either way, not my area of expertise, but it does have this social, emotional, physical communication, cognition, but it doesn't have the health or safety. And so I don't know if it's necessary to leave those in or not, just asking before we move past this section.
Well, Lori, I think that's a good question, but I don't remember the health and safety being key parts of the developmental domains. Were
Yeah,
they?
I don't either. I don't either. Again, I was just trying to make sure I understood why. Again, I don't have an argument for or against, just trying to understand.
And that would be what
Christine,
I was just gonna say what McCall said is exactly what Lance did.
Yeah, that's fine then. I'm fine with it as is. Just
do we
want
just
to
want to separate this to social emotional?
Mhm.
If we're gonna keep it.
Yeah, and I think to be consistent with what we just did in 110, and so even like where it says in each core domain, it's almost, if we use the language of the early learning developmental domains, I just think if we're kind of speaking the same language throughout this entire 63 chapter, guided learning process
Love it.
and daily plans.
Tell me where.
So on C, so equipment to enhance development and learning in the early childhood, in the early learning developmental domains, including, and then we can list them there because that's what we talk about before. But remember, we changed communication to language.
Okay. Including social, emotional, physical, communication, and cognition. So language.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's just what we decided for 110.
Yep. Encourage the integration of applicable early childhood content areas, including, okay. Thoughts, questions? Lori, your hand's still up.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I need to put it down, but I do like that better. Thank you.
But what?
My thinking is that we should have done 111 before 110 because how come we're just saying it all in a sentence and we're like, yeah, that's good. We would have never spent so much time on 110. We'd have been like, we covered it in 111 because I was so in on 110 that I didn't even look ahead of 111. Like I knew it, but I didn't study it. And I'm like, oh, well, we would have had way less heartache, I think. It's like, this looks great. Perfect. Move on. Now I feel good.
All right. Any other thoughts, questions on this section?
Just
Christine.
one more thing, sorry. It just in keeping with the spirit of this too, encourage integration of applicable early learning content standards. Again, just using the same exact language that we used in 110.
It. I'm gonna just do a find and replace for that just in case. Okay, any other thoughts, questions in this section? Are there more? Is there more? Oh, there is a little bit more. There was no red line. Do we have consensus from folks in this section? Thumbs up, feel good. Great. Make it gray. Okay, let's move to 112. Again, this is the instruction section. This I can take out again. Doug, take it away.
Well, you can see not a lot of dramatic changes happening here. I felt like a lot of the language that we already had in existence was pretty solid. I'm certainly open to anything that you guys come up with, but I felt good about what we had here.
Any questions or thoughts in this section? All right, we have consensus in this section. Everyone feel good? All right. Let's go to 113. And Penn, are you still on here?
Yes,
Perfect.
I am here. Nora and I were super excited. We had the easiest sections. We just kind of adopted Lance's recommendation, which for all three of our sections at the end were just to change preschool to early childhood education program. We didn't have any other recommended red line changes. And all components within physical and learning environments, 113, 114, and 115, so that's child guidance and family and community engagement, seem to apply to that early program. So yeah, it was very easy. I'll take any questions, but a quick meeting for us.
Thanks, Sam Penn.
Yeah.
Colette, your hand's up.
I'm sorry, I have to excuse myself for an IEP meeting, so I'm gonna get out. I need my laptop to get in the AIM system, so I will rejoin when the meeting's over.
Thank you. All right, any questions on physical and learning environment? How do we feel about consensus on this section? We should have started at the end. And then next, child guidance. I know, Ann Penn, you already spoke to this, so any questions on child guidance? Right, seeing none. How do we feel about consensus? Thumbs up. Great. Let's move to the last one, family and community. Oh, go ahead.
I just take that back. In that last one, if we want to be consistent, in number 1, it still says emotional and social.
Good job. Social and emotional. Okay, perfect. I can do it. I'm going to do another search for that just in case. Okay. And then 115. And Penn, you said there was nothing else to add. Anyone have any questions on this one? No questions. Everyone feel good about meeting consensus, reaching consensus? All right. So, I know we're ahead of the noon sort of take a quick lunch break. I'm wondering how folks feel about taking a break now and coming back at noon to sort of further work on 110, which gives me a little bit of time to just like quickly try to wordsmith it and bring it back to you guys at noon, and then hopefully we can sort of finish up that section and then we would be done. Are folks available to do that now? I realize it's sort of a change in the agenda.
McCall, I won't be here at noon. I have another Zoom meeting I have to get on, but if it can wrap up quick, I'll shoot back over.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Do others feel okay about that generally? Okay. Awesome. Let's do that. Let's take a break now until noon. And we will come back and we'll just finish up the content standards section of 110. And then we'll take public comment and figure out next steps. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you all back at noon.
Thanks, McCall.